So welcome to the HKS Energy Policy Seminar. I'm Joe Aldy, a member of the faculty here at the Harvard Kennedy School, and it's my pleasure to host the seminar again today. We're operating this semester seminar in a hybrid format. Thrilled to have all of our colleagues and students and fellows and friends with us here in the room, as well as on Zoom. We're also very thrilled to have with us today Marilyn Brown for her talk on powering progress throughout the United States. Marilyn is a Regents and Brooke Byers Professor of Sustainable Systems in the Carter School of Public Policy at the Georgia Institute of Technology. Her research and teaching focuses on evaluating the impact of energy technology, policy, and market innovations. Professor Brown is a scholar who has regularly engaged in the policy process, having co-led the National Energy Laboratory's 5 Lab study of 1997, contributed to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and served as a presidential appointee and 2-term regulator of the Tennessee Valley Authority. She joined Georgia Tech in 2006 after 22 years at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where she led the lab's research on energy efficiency, renewables, and the electric grid. Professor Brown has been elected to the National Academy of Sciences, which would be a great accomplishment on its own. She's been elected to the National Academy of Engineering, which would be a great accomplishment on its own, and to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, so a trifecta. Marilyn, it's a thrill for us to have you here with us today. Marilyn, we'll start with some comments and a slide presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Marilyn, welcome to the Energy Policy Seminar.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe, for inviting me to come and to meet with your students, colleagues, and friends. It's a privilege to be here at the Kennedy School of Government, representing the Carter School of Public Policy. We are both led in the memory of wonderful presidents who are committed to public service in particular. I'll never forget JFK's statement, don't ask what you can do for your country, don't ask what the country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And Jimmy Carter similarly had a life of service in mind, particularly post a presidency. He's noted for that, along with many other things as well. So here we are looking at energy. Carter said we need to add solar to all of our rooftops and wear sweaters. Right, and JFK said we need to put a man on the moon. And I think you're all learning as public policy students that we need to meet the needs of the here and now, but also look to the future to improve it. So I'm going to talk about the energy future today. Let's see. Return. Oh, my clicker. Okay, thank you. It was working in our dry run.
Can you see it? No. Sorry, you might have to use your mouse pad.
Where do I go forward? Oh, there. Okay, is it going to work? Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right. Well, before I talk about energy security and technology and futures, I want to introduce to you my colleagues from the Climate and Energy Policy Laboratory that I run at Georgia Tech in the School of Public Policy. It's called CEPL for short, and there is a QR code. You can go and look and see what we're doing. And these are the individuals who I'm working with now, a wonderful set of colleagues that span questions about policies and markets and impacts and all of the life cycle of energy questions related to policy that you could imagine. All right. So as context and goals for this research, we're in the midst of experiencing an energy policy paradigm shift. Now, if I had been given this talk 5 years ago, I would have said the same thing. We're in the midst of an energy policy paradigm shift, but the shift is very different. Different policies are being debated. But what's different also about the shift today is that I can't find the analysis, this underpinning the justification for the policy choices that are currently being debated. I'm sure it's that the analysis is being done and just not yet published. I did get to go to the CODA conference in Los Alamos this spring, winter, spring, and it was a data analytics conference. And I was able to give a precursor to this talk. And I was looking forward to hearing a similar talk and remarks by some of the other 150 participants. But what I got instead were little slices, little pieces of the puzzle being debated in great detail and beautifully elaborated with data analytics, but nothing big and broad. So that's what I'm going to try to tee up here today. This is the outline for my talk: research methodology, questions to be asked, results, and some conclusions. So the 3 research questions here. How should the US baseline energy forecast be updated to account for all of the rapidly changing economic and societal conditions that we're experiencing? The baseline forecasts that have been prepared in the past no longer apply to today's future. And second, what impacts could an energy paradigm, policy paradigm shift have where we subsidize and use regulatory support for oil and natural gas production, where we also subsidize small modular nuclear reactors and promote demand response? Those are the 3 topics that I'm hearing a lot about and thinking maybe our future will have some policies that relate to them. And after doing some data analytics and modeling and sharing the results, we'll then ask what all of this means and have a bit of a discussion, I hope. So the methodology is my preferred methodology, and that is the National Energy Modeling System. As Joe mentioned, I used it in 1997, and I've been using it ever since. The National Energy Modeling System is arguably the most comprehensive and certainly the most fully documented model of the US energy economy. It's been around for decades. It is the basis of the publication of the Annual Energy Outlook, and also is the basis of a lot of past work on policies and economic change. So including this 5 Lab report that was the basis for that allowed, in President Clinton's words, him to sign the Kyoto Protocol, because it showed that you could reduce carbon emissions and not harm the economy. And with that evidence, he signed, but Congress, the Senate, did not. Still, Kyoto Protocol transformed the international trading of credits and activities, and was, even though we were not party to it, it was transformational. So the National Energy Modeling System is a computable general equilibrium model. So it balances all aspects of the economy, which are shown here in this chart of the modules that comprise NEMS. It's a little bit like a Sankey diagram. Who has ever seen a Sankey diagram of the energy system of anything? Okay. Not in every course you're taking, I see, but we'll have to change that. But you sort of go from what's consumed on the left side to what is produced, what's used as fuels, and what's produced as services on the right. And in between are the transformations. You're missing some of the transformational details here, very complicated, but it is a full economy model. It also has a connection to the International Energy Activity Module, which, by the way, it cannot adjust. It just takes and interfaces. There's no way for me to model, for instance, tariffs that we might but we might create and see how the international module responds. The NEMS model is a little bit chunky because it treats the US as a set of regions. In the case of the electricity market, it uses the 25 pseudo-NERC, North American Electricity Regulatory Corporation. I always get that wrong. Bill, North American Electricity Reliability Council. I got one of those R's or C's wrong every time. So they have, they use regions that look like these 25 in the upper right-hand map. In the lower map are the Census Bureau's divisions. There are 9 of them. They're also aggregated into 4 regions. So when you go to look at census data, and they're chunky, those are the chunks they're using. So this sort of data is what NEMS uses, and it's chunky when it comes to dealing with the time slices of energy demand and production. So we have a few hundred time slices rather than every hour of every year. But they're regionally distributed, and I think do a pretty good job, about 100 hours for each of the peaks in each of the seasons in each of the 25 regions. So there are other models that you could use. And one of them I wanted to mention, in case you've not come across it, is the Rocky Mountain Institute Energy Policy Simulator, a wonderful teaching tool. You can put it on your laptop, and you can turn the crank, and you can look at not only the United States, but you can look at India and China, and you can look at every state of the United States, and has 7 sectors, and within each sector, a set of different policies that you can look at. But it's not a CGE. It's not a computable general equilibrium model because things don't interact. So for instance, if you put a lot of money into electric vehicles, but you don't decarbonize the economy, right? If you don't decarbonize the electricity system, it's not going to be as impactful as if you work together on those 2 policy advances. So it's good, and you should take a look at it, but don't stop there. Go further to something more sophisticated. But the National Energy Modeling System is a big step. It's not a little mini baby step. I have students always say when I tell them that the simulator you're using is good, but it's not all that great. And they say, can I use your NEMS? And I say, oh, it takes me 8 to 12 hours for one run. It's costs tens of thousands every year to update it, to update all of the contributing software, and it takes a lot of time to learn it. It produces just thousands of tables of data, and you can't find the data unless you have been trained. So it's kind of a career, and we need more people to elect to take on what they call the developer's case of NEMS, because the EIA, Energy Information Administration, allows organizations that they approve to get in and modify any of the modules. The entire software program is up for grabs if you are given the modeler's version. So consider it. Every major energy institute at a big university should be running it, in my opinion. But it does need to be updated periodically, and it hasn't been updated for a while. They skipped 24. They're revising NEMS. They have a 25, but it's just now been released, and I'm not sure about it. So I took the 23, the latest NEMS, and I made my own additions with my students. So one thing we needed to do was to ensure that we were better reflecting the growth of electricity demand from the demand for power from data centers. We also needed to increase the demand increase the speed of electrification of the economy, given the light-duty vehicle regulations that have been passed by EPA, requiring more electric vehicles. For instance, the code requires, the standard requires that by the year 2032, 56% of new light-duty vehicles will be electric. So we've got that in there, we put that standard in. And then third, we looked at the Inflation Reduction Act and all that came with it, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and CHIPS bill, and all of that, put it in and took it out. It was actually an existing option that EIA had. It had the IRA, et cetera, in, but it had one where you could say, now let's take them out. So that was easy. We could just use that option. Oh, also, yeah, so that includes tax credits for EVs, but also the IRA, of course, has a lot more subsidies, such as for carbon capture and sequestration. All right, I'm going to take those adjustments one by one to explain what we did and why. The growth of data centers. So here, this is a picture of a Google data center just up the road from Georgia Institute of Technology. And it is using a lot of electricity, but it's for Google, and Google is contracting to be a good user of electricity with its utility in order to be repaid for being responsive when there is a peak load that it can contribute to tackling. So it's one of a couple of arrangements like that that are occurring across the country, where data centers are contracting with utilities to be paid for being responsive. So the amount of growth in demand for data center electricity was advised by the Goldman Sachs forecast, but there are all variety of forecasts all over the spectrum that could be used. Electrification and the embodiment of light-duty vehicle standards was really a way to try to characterize the rapid electrification of many end uses in the US today. And so I took a few pictures of my house in Atlanta, 105-year-old, I can do it. In a 105-year-old house, you can do it. You know, we've got our EV, we got our charger, we got our Tesla Powerwall, we've got our solar, we've got all of the controls and smart sensors, et cetera. That's the sort of future that we're going to see that's going to be driven by electricity. So when we talk about energy security, increasingly it's going to be an electricity issue, but maybe not in the near term. Near term, we'll talk about that. In fact, we'll talk about that now. Because remember, there are 3 energy policy initiatives that I also elected to try to model. So we did 2 corrections. That was electrification trends and data center electricity demand growth. And now we have 3 energy policies that I think are being debated and deserve some analysis. And they include HOGS, unfortunate acronym, a high oil and gas supply policy, small modular reactor subsidies, and demand response support. So I'll talk about a page on each of those. So high oil and gas supply, HOGS policy, is a policy that that models a greater, more complete recovery of oil and gas from drilling technological improvements that reduce costs by undiscovered resources that are exploited, and more offshore lower 48 state production. So in this is our US export of crude oil over time, which obviously reflects our production of crude oil. And you can see already post 2022, we have spiked up significantly, and that is old data and is continuing. So in a sense, we're kind of already moving in that direction. Just 5 years ago, the US was still a net energy importer. In 2024, we became the world's largest exporter of both oil and liquid natural gas. The value of these is on the order, at least in 2024, of 60, let's see, exports valued at about 64 billion, which includes some LNG, which is a more recent addition. This compares to, let's say, the amount that we export in agriculture. That's our biggest export. In Georgia, that's our biggest export. But as a country, ag is the biggest export. And now oil and gas make up half the totality of the value of ag exports, coming from practically nothing 5 years ago. So this is a major transformation that's occurring. And so we have implemented a policy that would keep that moving forward as one possibility. And then we also added a policy that's a little bit more complicated to model, and that is the support for demand response. In this case, we're modeling it as an increase in the peak load reduction allowed within the model. So the baseline assumption is that we can move something like 2.5% at most of the peak. You can shave 2.5% of the peak any year between 2025 and 2050. Any year, that's the peak. It doesn't move forward. Our modeling allows that peak to be dropped by 5% each year for 10 years. So we think that we have the capacity, and if the rewards were there in the business community, we could drop our peak by 25 or 50% quite rapidly. And that's what we model, is the ability. This is not pushing that into the model, but it's enabling that NEMS could choose up to a 50% reduction in peak by the year 2035. 5-year drop every year for 10 years. So one of the reasons that this is a nice, gotta go back. I have to run my little video while I'm talking. There we go. I missed my video on demand response. So this is a sort of a combination of data centers and demand response. It's a Google video. And what they're showing is that there's a lot going on in the communities in which they're located that they can interact with in ways that make their impact on the electricity demand in a region to be favorable by having responsive load that they can tee up upon request or at a or upon a contractual agreement, particular hours of the day that they cut back with non-essential data mining. All right, so that's demand response. Now, small modular reactors, they're on their way, and I anticipate there'll be considerable future government support for that. There's a reduction. We model this by reducing the overnight capex cost of small modular reactors by 35% below the reference case. We implement a learning rate increase of 20%. And we create a production tax credit for specifically small modular reactors. And then we run NEMS with all of this loaded up, and we see what happens. So why do we think that this is viable? Well, a lot is happening in the small modular reactor field. There are 56 SMRs under development, designs. They may not be breaking ground yet, but they're open for business. And a couple of these, one of these in particular, is now under construction in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And that's the design of it. So we think that it is reasonable. This is not only, this is not the Kairos power is a second SMR that's being discussed in TVA's territory and may be built over the next 5 years. They say by 2030, they'll be up and running here. Yes.
Just a clarification, it says increases 20% from 4 point. I think you meant increases to 20% from.
Oh.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, thank you.
So a factor of 5.
Yeah. Good. So a learning rate of 20% means that every time you double the production of small modular reactors, you are every time you double, the cost goes down by 20%. That's the definition of a learning rate. It's the percent reduction that you get every time you double production. So that's I'll have to work on my on the language there, but that's what I meant. Okay. All right. Thank you, Bill. Results. Now we're getting into, we've got our corrections and we have our 3 policies. And now what do we get when we turn the crank and run the model? Well, we developed some indicators that we thought were good metrics that we were able to access to the results of this tool. And they include system performance metrics like what's the impact on GDP, on gas use for electricity, renewables for electricity, all important for reliability and security, and then sustainability indicators such as carbon. And on the right side, we have some indicators that have to do with affordability and prices, bills. In particular, we look at the bills of households for residential and transportation. But here we also look at rates. What are the prices for residential electricity, residential natural gas, and motor gasoline prices? And here are some results. This is a really hard table to work through. I could spend an hour on this one and the next one. I will try very hard to do it in 1 minute each. We just take a look at the colored boxes, right? So the IRA, whether it's with, here's reference case plus IRA, reference case with no IRA. Everything added here and everything else added there. So sort of 4 views. We can look at them one by one, but here we've got them separated. And in the box, in the cells of this spreadsheet, you have green meaning a favorable outcome and red meaning an unfavorable outcome. And you can see that the cost, the GDP is driven up by all three except the no IRA, but by the way, the current GDP, I think, is 30 trillion. I looked it up. I mean, it's something like that. So we are directionally probably correct, but the economy is so overheated that the numbers from 3 years ago, 2 years ago, just don't reflect where we are now today. But I still think directionally, these are telling us that basically add the IRA and it doesn't hurt the economy. That's basically the point. And then if we do add these other things, the hogs and everything else, the economy heats up, right? So you have good economic responsiveness to all of the other adjustments being made. Not too much happening with the electricity use, natural gas, and renewables, but over here for sustainability, you can see what you would expect, and that is where you have just the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, with so much emphasis on renewables that you have a very marked reduction in the CO2 emissions from the US down to 3.9 billion, or yeah, 393 million metric tons. Everything else, there's a penalty to do in terms of impact on sustainability, which I define here as simply CO2. And here we have prices. So what happens with prices? Well, IRA does a pretty good job with reducing prices for electricity, not so much when you remove it. And for natural gas, all the loading up of hogs, the high oil and gas, here and here, both reduce our natural gas prices. And for motor gasoline, pretty much the same thing. You add all the additional policies and you get favorably lower gas prices, but you also get lower gas prices with the Inflation Reduction Act and with some of these other activities, because you're implementing so much electrification into the transportation sector. So kind of a very complex but understandable response here. Now I'm just going to show you 3 pictures. These are direct, almost screenshots, not quite, but from the NEMS modeling. Just 3 of them to show you some of the trends over time and what you can do when you look at these one at a time, as opposed to in the packages that where I bundled everything together. And now let's just highlight a few that are pertinent to questions we're asking. So oil imports plummet with high oil and gas supply policies. Obviously, that's maybe the major purpose for those policies. But in addition, what you see here, you see that oil imports are also reduced when you push on electrification of transportation. So there are 2 ways that we can reduce our consumption. We can increase our exports. We can reduce our consumption of petroleum, or we can generate more petroleum and oil and gas, right? Speaking of natural gas, let's see. LNG, liquefied natural gas, which is what we export. We import or export crude oil, and we export liquid natural gas. And here, kind of the same thing, that the liquid natural gas exports increase more rapidly when this is, I'm sorry, let me go to the main point. When you have all of the other liquid natural gas exports increase rapidly with the oil and gas supply policy. So whenever you have the et al, you've got oil and gas, and it's on top. But when you introduce the IRA, once again, you are able to reduce natural gas domestic requirements, and you're able to export more LNG. So kind of the same logic as we saw from petroleum. And on a slightly different topic, small modular reactors, subsidies for them with demand response enable small modular reactors to grow significantly from 1.5 gigawatts in 2035 to more than 200, almost 400 gigawatts by the year 2050. What was a surprise aha moment for me here was the impact of demand response on the uptake of small modular reactors. I knew demand response and data centers. That was kind of our going in. We like that combination. But here, we can't modulate nuclear either in a large reactor or in a small one. They run all the time unless they're down for maintenance. So they don't fit well into our society with peaks and troughs. But with demand response, you can make them more compatible, supplementing the steadiness of small modular reactors and allowing them to grow significantly. So this is with no demand response. Here, with demand response is the red. So that was a nice moment of sort of appreciation for using a computable general equilibrium model, where you're looking at all together. And you might not see that in more simplistic models. IRA with a reference case makes electricity more affordable. I didn't want to drone on about the benefits of the IRA because we're probably never going to see it again in, at least a while. But had it gone forward, we would have had much more affordable electricity because of its support for renewables. I have one more topic, and that is energy affordability. So now I'm going to look at the 9 census regions, census divisions of the US, and you should in particular memorize the names of the South Atlantic region. That's my home base, there's Georgia. And the East South Central region, where I worked for so long, there's Tennessee, right? And also I'll be mentioning where we are here today, New England. So this is a terrible eye chart. I know some of you from the back can't possibly see it. So I'm just going to talk about it in terms of colors. So take a look first at the black bars. Now let me tell you what this is all about. We have the 9 regions in 2022, 30, make sure I've got this right, 35 and 50. There they are, 2022, 35, and 50. Arrayed in no particular order, the way they're dropped out of the computer. We're combining residential costs per average household income in the region with the average cost of motor gasoline, meaning your mobility costs, so your household costs and your mobility costs. And together, we're calling that the total household energy affordability. And we're making it a function of income because that makes it into an energy burden metric, which is the more common term. It's a little bit out of favor, so I hope I'm not being recorded. Oh, I am. So what you see here is that those two regions that I asked you to focus on have the highest energy costs per average household income. By the way, this is hard. This is a data crunch. It's really a lot of work because we're now going back and forth with data from different places and making extrapolations of population and thinking about the incomes likely for people in regions in 2050, and it's all got to be justified. So we're going outside the bands now of the National Energy Modeling System because they don't do average household income. We have to get that from elsewhere. But there's a persistently high energy burden in those two regions of the South. The energy burden in New England is not too bad, but look at how high it is for residential energy compared to transportation. So your bills altogether are not so bad, but your electricity bills are some of the highest of any of the 9 divisions, the bills over income. You're the wealthiest region, so you have to kind of factor that in, but still, a pretty high proportion of your income is going to residential energy needs. Another thing I like to note about this chart is that over time, it looks like the vision is that we will be paying less of our income on energy because we're starting with the highest average bills per income and dropping down to significantly less. Another thing I'd like to note is that it appears as though the regional diversification or disparities also dwindle over time, becomes a little bit more homogeneous. Would like to say this because we're trading more across, but I'm not sure. I think trends are just coalescing, and we're all taking advantage of that. So that's the last of my results, and I have just one concluding slide, and that is to try to put all of this into the context of how you might judge these 3 energy policies that I'm debating because they appear to be being examined in the public domain today. It seems to me that how you judge them depends on the importance that you place on different goals. And depending on your preference for the outcome of policy, you would go with one package or another. Let's say that you were really interested in affordable energy. Well, renewables with hogs, the small modular reactor and demand response would be your best bet based on the results here. They would decrease electricity, transportation fuels. Without the renewables, the electricity prices rise. So that's one take. Well, what if you're really mostly interested in energy security? And then we have some defense folks here, and that might be their preference. Well, same as above, because that first one is very diverse. It's a good package of multiple sources of energy, which of course is one way that you get security across the economy. Well, what about economic growth? Well, economic growth in this case appears to me to be largely driven by exports and reduced imports. And so the hogs are a way to go, but also electric vehicles because we don't have to drive them on gasoline or diesel. And how about sustainability? Well, this is a little more complicated. I need to accelerate renewables, which eventually will displace fossil fuels, demand response, and modular reactors. That would be a near net zero pollution strategy. So I would like to know, which of these would you vote for? And maybe leave it at that. Thank you.
So Marilyn, I'll kick it off with the first question, and then we'll go around the room for questions from the audience. One of the great values of simplifying the world in a model is it starts to give us some insights, and insights that, here where you're doing it of the whole US energy economy, but some insights where we can then do sort of subsequent work and drill down and sort of test for results that seem to be quite big, test some of the assumptions, test how it works out in progress, so in practice. So I'm curious about the potential for demand response in data centers. So I'm someone who is on the outside, not that well versed in this. The way it's been described to me when we think about data centers, there's kind of like three different types of data centers out there. One is like a warehouse. That's like an old data center. That's like sort of cloud computing. We just stored the family pictures up on, and it's being, so you have that kind of like warehouse approach. You have a factory that's like a really high-end factory. Like when we think about Gen AI applications now, like this is why we hear people say they need to have firm power 24/7. This is state-of-the-art computing, pushing these models, and it has to be, always getting the power, high quality power coming in. And then there's kind of like a factory that's not the frontier. It's I've already built the model, and now I'm just kind of doing some of the spin-offs and the applications of that model that I may have some flexibility and power. I don't have a good enough sense of, like, as we're building out data centers, how much of it is like warehouses, and maybe warehouses that I might duplicate when I think about cloud storage as opposed to, say, cloud computing. I think Amazon has a bunch of warehouses around the country, and they can be kind of substitutes for each other. So you can imagine locally having demand response like that. How much of this is like really in what we're building, these sort of frontier Gen AI factories, where people want to win the AI race. I'm still not sure where we're racing to, but we're going to win the AI race. And then there's this kind of like, churn it out, but can be adjusted. And we'd like to get a sense of like how we might go about, either if it's something you've looked into in the data, if you've got a sense of like how much can we really push demand response. Because some of the narrative I hear is like, it's got to be firm 24/7 power. That doesn't sound like demand response for Gen AI. So I'd like to get a sense of like how much you've been able to sort of explore with you and your colleagues in the lab, sort of testing that assumption, or getting a sense of how much in that big Goldman Sachs growth that they're expecting is technology that you really could make responsive to power markets and power prices and contracts, and how much they really want to just be running 24/7.
Yeah. Great question. And it can't be answered in NEMS.
Right.
That's
right.
another
Yep.
research
Yeah, so I asked you a
pathway.
question
Yeah.
unrelated to this, motivated by this work,
Yep.
but not what
Yep.
you would study with this
Yep.
tool.
So lots of reflections there. There are different types of data centers, of course. And there's a lot of warehouses that have nothing to do with data that we still ought to be managing. And so the opportunity spills over to them as well. And they probably are a little bit more manageable. But I'm understanding that the principal problem that we're facing and not negotiating contracts such as you're talking about is regulatory between utilities and their customers. There are standard tariffs that they can choose from, but those are not the ones that we need. We need them to be customized, and they need to reflect the kinds of conditions you're talking about. So it's a very exciting moment in time for Bill Hogan to come back and teach another course on regulatory regulations in the electricity industry, because that's got to be part of the solution. Yeah, that's a great question. I did mean to also say, though, that I've not talked at all about storage, and that's an omission. My major PhD co-author of this work is Niraj Kapal at Georgia Tech. He's in his last year, and he's looking at the impact of EV subsidies on the improvement in the performance and the drop in price of batteries. So it's another one of those things that we've done in NEMS, and we can show you if you push electrification of vehicles, you're going to get really cheap storage out there. And then you get solar and wind with that storage. And so there's a lot going on that I think will tee up a more affordable storage eventually, because what we've done is to show what can happen if you learn through massive production of more batteries in terms of cheaper
We
batteries.
get that spillover out of the vehicle
Right,
space.
moving it,
Yep.
which again is that, computer generalized, whatever. You can't get that in every model, but we can see it, and we've looked at that. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Let me open it up to questions from the audience.
So which of those four at the end would you prefer?
So the questions have now come to the audience now, since you don't have a question for Marilyn. Bill.
You just say a little more about how transmission networks uh, are handled in the model, and how lags between our ability to either raise supply or raise demand at the two ends, the two limiting cases of your model, get impacted if we hit a bottleneck in expansion and intercomparability of transmission networks.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I can answer that question very well. I know what the condition is on the ground. I know we have queues for from utilities that want to connect their plants to the transmission grid, and they have to get in line. And I know that NEMS has a way of putting more money into transmission and helping facilitate, but I don't know how they actually model queues. I don't know that they are really modeled. I think there's some kind of general like lethargy or something.
It needs to be a
It's
concern of us in a model
yeah.
that's a cost minimization
Yeah.
calculation
Yeah.
as to how it is handled.
Yeah.
Parts of the system that may not
Yeah.
respond very
Yeah.
well to prices,
Yeah.
anything like the
Yeah.
timescales that your learning rates.
Yeah.
already are.
I think my answer to you really ought to be, I'll get back to you on how it's handled. That's a great question. Maybe you could ask another one that I could answer. All right, good.
You know, I think Bill's question on transmission is correct, but also there's another one on gas, which is the fact that it takes anywhere between, who you want to believe, 5 to 7 years to get a contract for a new gas turbine. And up in a place like this region, we've been fighting over gas pipelines for almost 10 years without much success. So there's also in the gas area, there is this bottleneck. So if you're building a data center and you want to get gas into it, and you can build a data center in 2 to 3 years, you're still going to have to wait 3 more years after that for a new gas turbine or a pipeline that can deliver the gas. But my question is that I wanted to focus on was the small nuclear reactors. You assumed a 35% reduction in capital costs and a quadrupling of the learning rate. What led you to pick those?
Well, I'd like to say that what led us to pick those was the result of a survey that we conducted, but the results are not yet in. So we have a survey being conducted. It was teed up at the annual nuclear conference in Atlanta last week. So we have been talking with experts, and now we're trying to get a good sample of maybe 35 or so to fill in a survey. Doing pretty well. We got about 20 some people already in, and more that have committed to. So we have our experts we've talked to about that, and now we're going to have something more definitive. Good, another good question. I mean, they're also in the nuclear field, as you know, the learning curve has been negative. So one of our questions in the survey is, do you think that the modular reactors will have a negative learning curve? And I think the experts are saying no.
Okay, I have a question from the infrastructure of transmission and the distribution, because I'm from China, and just as you mentioned, maybe for data center, if you can have flexible demand response, maybe you can have much more priority to be accommodated or accepted by the power grid. And I don't know if we can make just such a policy to encourage the demand response of that center. Maybe just like Professor Aldi said, we can promote much more that center to give demand response resources. I don't know if it's workable in United States.
Yeah. Well, I have an idea. So we have not used our legislatures very powerfully in promoting clean energy or efficiency, affordability of energy, but they do have the right, for instance, to set renewable portfolio standards. And they could set standards for the connectivity of, let's say, data centers or new builds, and require that any new significant load being added to a system have some amount of responsiveness. That would be one way to cut through the otherwise lethargic speed at which utility rules can change. So it can be done. I'll get right on that too.
This may be a contrarian question, but it gets to the getting right on it a bit. I wonder if in your research and thinking about our energy grid, you see any drawbacks to moving quickly. It seems like the impetus, both from the energy sector and maybe in Congress, and certainly from the administration at the moment, is just to move rapidly. And to repeal regulations in order to do that, to change longstanding statutes in order to do that. I wonder if you see drawbacks to doing that, both sort of from the technical aspect of your work and broadly because you've worked in energy policy for many decades.
I'd like to respond by asking you a question. Have you seen the administration pushing on trying to accelerate the construction of new transmission and distribution infrastructure?
I don't know if they're pushing very well, but I think they think that rescinding, for example, NEPA regulations for BLM and Forest Service will help do that. Again, I think repealing the IRA is probably the worst way to go about that. But there is big impetus. I don't know if the steps that they're taking are the right ones, both in Congress and from the administration. It seems to move quickly. Maybe not to move smartly, which I think is what the IRA was trying to do, but at least to move quickly.
I don't think that their actions that I've seen have been very comprehensive. So, for instance, they're not, to my knowledge, making any difference in any place I've been in lately. Maybe opening up federal lands or that sort of thing might be part of a solution, but I don't know. I've not seen anything that I would say is happening.
Okay, I guess the broader question is, do you see drawbacks to moving quickly?
I don't know, absolutely not. No, smartly, if you move quick and smart, great. Yeah, that's what we need. One of the biggest problems we have is the infrastructure for transmitting electricity. Yeah, that's good. Uh-oh.
It's not It's a question distance. You can correct me if what I'm about to say is wrong,
Okay.
but I think just a responsibility. The structure of NEMS, as you characterize, has got these regions, whether it's census regions or different kinds of groups, which has been a character of those models for decades. Doing it that way,
Forever. Mhm.
and they invariably turned out to be what is mathematically known as transportation models. So there's a link between this region and that region, and stuff flows down that transportation model. That, of course, is not how the system actually works, although you could sort of approximate it with something like that. And then the way the system actually works is the way we do it in real time and all that kind of stuff, which is to model the actual network and the power flows everywhere, and all that kind of Kirchhoff's law stuff that's important. And conceptually, the state of the art is to embed those Kirchhoff law into these optimization models, which look forward and construct new stuff. Now, here's the part which I'm not sure is true, but I think it's true, which is I don't think there is any such model in existence. So I think it's actually a frontier challenge where you get down with the level of detail you talk about here, and it optimizes everything, including the grid, and the grid is all accurately representing the power flows. And so it's an iterative story in most places I know of. They use one model to do the one expansion, and then they do the other, check it, and then they come back and modify. There's kind of a little bit going on there. And I think it's actually quite a serious challenge today. And it's part of the debates that are going on about all of this transformation. So it doesn't affect anything you said here, but I'm trying to describe a conceptual challenge that people might be interested in working on.
Very important challenge, and I don't know if it's being built into this new blue sky approach. Have you heard of the blue sky modeling that was discussed at the EIA? I don't know that they've moved forward on it. I think maybe they've paused it, but this was more, doing more within NIMS and making it publicly accessible. So public access model with more would have been great. Haven't seen movement on it recently. Yeah, but that's a big need. We have a very strong, one of the strongest electrical engineering, electrical and computing engineering schools at Georgia Tech, as you know, and we have, I'm sure you know many of these people, Santiago and others, who have done smaller scale regional models of electricity. But when you start getting to I don't know anyone that's done a detailed national model of the type you're talking about. And one of the things that I got, yeah, 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 right, right. And one of the things that I believe my National Academy of Engineering appointment was based on was some of the work I did inside NIMS using Fortran to try to improve the decision-making rules that were embedded within it. There's a lot that can be done. I mean, for all of you who know Fortran, which is a very literal script, no problem. You could do that too, and you could do something much more, but and that would be fun. And you should have a new initiative to do something big like that.
Marilyn, I fear there's not a single course at the Kennedy School in which problem sets require our students to use Fortran these days. I want to
Hey, look, we go.
okay, so there's a few here. I don't think I have. I guess I'm just too young, Bill. I'd like to go back to I'd like to go back to how we think about the model simplifying the world and some of the key assumptions being made in the application of NIMS. You noted that the international module is effectively exogenous. You can't test out policies on the international front like tariffs.
Yeah.
For that matter, you don't see, I believe, correct me about this iteration of NIMS, I believe it takes the world oil price as an exogenous parameter in the model. which in a world in which the US is producing 5 million barrels a day and is a big net importer, that's probably fine. We're now having seen, of course, as you documented, this big change in our position on oil, a big change going from expected to be a big net importer of gas to net exporter of gas over the last 15 years. Would like for you to sort of reflect, though, your model can't look at that, but what would be the implications? You think of what you find in these scenarios, how might they spill over internationally? What would it mean as the US becomes a bigger oil and gas producer in the hog scenario for the world price of oil? Or what would it mean if we really did achieve some of these learning rates on SMRs, on the potential adoption of this technology around the world? Recognizing it's not in your analysis, but if you could sort of speak to what you think the potential implications could be and how one might go about evaluating that, I think that would be great for our students.
That's a good question. So there have been studies, and there was a DOE report on what's the likely impact of our exporting so much liquefied natural gas on domestic gas prices, right? So I don't know. I don't think that that's in NEMS. I could be wrong. I don't know. It wasn't ever an issue. And, who would have thought 5 years ago that we would be a net exporter of liquid natural gas? So a lot of really good research questions that could take place. Nobody could decide what the, did you remember that debate? The Secretary of Energy weighed in on it, and Granholm said that it could spike.
So there's yes, there's an array of views both at DOE and I think among academics on the impact on both prices, but also emissions globally and how the spillovers play out.
Yes, yeah. So good fodder for student research for sure.
Great. One more time for one more question, Bill.
Yeah, again, a modeling question here on your sustainability theme. The conclusion makes sense. I'm not sure we needed a huge model to tell us that. But a lot of people are doing work on social cost of carbon, social cost of not just the CO2 climate effects, but those plus the air pollution effects. Does this model framework give you a way to exogenously impose the sort of ramped cost of carbon into the system, given it's a general equilibrium model? So how much do things change in the other three dimensions you were evaluating if you put in a scenario more consistent with where the science is saying the damages to the economy are of the fossil fuel emissions? How much does it mess up the economic growth, energy security, affordable energy?
Haven't looked at that lately, but I have modeled in previous versions of NEMS $100 a ton tax on carbon. And because people were complaining, NEMS can't take us to zero, net zero. And it's true then, but we now can. I mean, the most recent models allow us, you can get put in a very high price, which is like a social cost of carbon. Comparable. So yes, this would be a very good model for informing, at least at first blush, all of these other questions about quality of life.
Because too much of the debate, social cost of carbon, right now, it seems to me, is going into infinite deep rabbit hole on the third significant digit in the number.
Yeah.
But it is done as a snapshot. What would you do tomorrow morning if you got your price?
Yeah.
Would you build more of this or that? But the economy-wide implications of that over the time scale of retiring some infrastructure, building new. Is anybody doing that in a general equilibrium model?
So I did look at something similar and published it in some place, I think Energy Policy, which was on how far could you push energy efficiency? And I couldn't get it very far and then added a price on carbon. That was a very nice piece. It's well referenced because it talks about deep decarbonization using NEMS, and it was that could be replicated. That's a good way to go. I think you first, of course, push efficiency, and then efficiency. That's the cheapest opportunity, well recognized, depending on.
So Bill's going to think about this and follow up after the seminar. Before we wrap up, let me know we'll meet again at noon next Monday. We'll be hosting Neil Chatterjee, the Chief Government Affairs Officer of Palmetto and a former chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Neil will speak on the energy demand era. And finally, please join me in thanking Professor Brown for her talk and her insights today. Thank you, Marilyn.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.